Welcome to the Deep Dive from the English BookCast. This is the show where we take a stack of pretty compelling sources, dense academic books, complex narratives, and we pull out the essential knowledge for you, basically giving you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed.
And today, we are tackling something, well, pretty monumental.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
We're doing a deep analysis of the foundational materials, so the introduction and the first 4 chapters of a book called Vedic Physics, Scientific Origin of Hinduism.
It's authored by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who holds a PhD. And this book, it's a really serious scholarly attempt to re-examine the Ṛgveda.
Right.
And he's arguing that it's not just a collection of hymns or, myths. He thinks it's a meticulously organized scientific document that contains a full-blown model of the universe.
The premise itself is just.
Yeah.
It's radical. The idea that the ancient Indus Valley Civilization was so advanced that they developed a system to, code their cosmology into poetry.
Exactly, into poetry and oral tradition so it could survive for thousands of years.
So our mission today is to unpack that initial argument. We need to understand what was driving the author and then, follow his breadcrumbs from the source of all this knowledge back to a time before time even existed.
And then to the very moment the universe began its expansion. But to really appreciate how audacious this all is, we have to start where Roy starts, with his own intellectual journey.
Yeah, he mentions this in the preface, right? This big intellectual conflict.
He does. It all stems from that question we all ask ourselves, who am I? Why am I here?
The ultimate spiritual quest. But for someone like Roy, with his background in material science and engineering, that kind of question runs headlong into the cold, hard logic of modern physics.
That's it, exactly. He said he had a very spiritual childhood, studying texts like the Gita, but then his academic training, specifically in relativity and quantum mechanics, it led to a sort of crisis of faith for him.
How so?
He found that modern science, for all its power in describing how things work, it just presented a universe that was completely devoid of any inherent meaning. He even says it pushed him towards an uncomfortable atheism.
So from that conflict, this core idea emerges.
Yes, and it's a really compelling one. He says, look, if religion, and specifically the Vedas, presents the true ultimate view of reality, then it absolutely cannot contradict the proven findings of science.
Okay, so if they appear to contradict each other.
It just means we've misunderstood the ancient texts. That's the whole premise.
So the book is basically an attempt to use the language of modern physics as a key to unlock what he thinks is the original scientific meaning of the Vedic hymns.
Precisely. And the philosophical foundation for all of this is rooted in classical Indian tradition, this idea of Bandhu.
Bandhu, what does that mean exactly?
It's the intrinsic connection between the cosmic and the individual.
So the goal isn't just cosmology. It's about our own identity.
It is. The whole framework insists on this unity between the cosmos, which they called Puruṣa, and the individual self, the Atman. The idea is, knowing oneself, one can know the world. It makes the observer absolutely central to understanding reality.
When you say the central place of the observer, my mind immediately jumps to quantum mechanics.
Of course.
I mean, the measurement problem, the whole idea that the state of a particle literally changes just by being observed. It's one of the weirdest parts of modern physics.
It is, and that's a parallel the source material definitely touches on. The Vedic focus on mind and consciousness as, primary categories really echoes this modern debate.
But not all physicists would agree with that interpretation, would they?
Oh, not at all. Many would argue that consciousness is just an emergent property of, a complex brain. But the fact that thousands of years ago, these sages were grappling with the role of consciousness in defining physical reality, it suggests a level of sophistication we don't usually give them credit for.
Okay, let's unpack the first chapter then. It's called The Vedic Legacy, and it sort of sets the historical stage for everything else. We should start with the word itself.
Veda. It comes from the root Veda, which just means to know.
So it is, by definition, the source of knowledge.
Right. And ancient legal codes, like the Manusmriti, declared the Veda as the ultimate source of all dharma, which is, cosmic law and right conduct. And the author makes a key point here. He says that while lots of religions may have borrowed ideas, Hinduism is pretty unique in that it's kept this continuous, unbroken thread of Vedic tradition alive for millennia.
Even if the interpretation of that tradition changed over time.
Dramatically, yes.
Yeah.
Even if the meaning was lost, the tradition itself was preserved.
And the origin point he proposes isn't some, mythical lost land. It's a specific scientifically advanced civilization.
That's his core historical argument. He says the knowledge originated from the scientific achievements of the Indus Valley Civilization, or IVC, and he dates this back about 5,000 years to around 3000 BC.
So the key insight here is that this knowledge was, too complicated for most people.
It was highly specialized. He uses the word abstruse. The average person just couldn't grasp the complexities of, say, quantum fields or 10-dimensional space.
So if the scientific truth was too complex for mass consumption, what did they do?
They coded it. The sages decided to code this very sophisticated science into simpler, more memorable poetry and symbolism so it could be shared with the general population.
So they created a kind of user-friendly interface for quantum mechanics.
That's a great way to put it. And the Ṛgveda itself even hints at this. There's a verse that testifies to a secret, hidden meaning. The outer form became ritual and myth, but the inner meaning was always the physics.
And preserving this code became the #1 priority, especially when things got unstable. Why do they think oral transmission was better than just writing it all down?
It really came from a fear of loss. Specifically, they were worried about the coming Mahabharata war. They correctly predicted that civilization and knowledge were on the verge of collapse.
And writing things down makes them vulnerable.
Very vulnerable. They feared destruction, censorship, even just miscopying over generations. So instead, a figure they call Vedavyasa, the chief Vedic scientist, organized the Vedas and set up this intensive system of memorization. The sound, the meter, that became the container for the knowledge, ensuring it survived perfectly intact.
So let's walk through the body of literature that came out of this, starting with the core texts.
The foundation and the main focus of Roy's analysis is the Ṛgveda. It's considered the oldest, the most authentic, and the one that contains the cosmology. Then you have the Yajurveda, which is more about procedures.
And this is where we get that famous split, right? The white and black Yajurveda.
It is. And the story they tell to explain that split is a perfect example of how scientific fact gets turned into myth.
I remember this one. It involves someone vomiting, and birds, and a horse.
It's wild. The pupil, Yajnavalkya, is told to return the Veda to his teacher. He supposedly vomits it out using yoga, and other students eat it in the form of Titiri birds, which creates the black Yajurveda.
And the white one.
He then prays to the sun, who gives him the white Yajurveda in the form of a horse. Roy's argument is that this split was originally based on a real difference in scientific content, but that 1,000 years later, that reason was totally lost, replaced by this elaborate, memorable, but scientifically meaningless story.
Okay, so after the core Vedas, we start to see the first real signs of this scientific knowledge being lost.
Yes, in the commentaries, which are called the Brahmanas, texts like the Satapatha Brahmana, they were written to explain the hymns, but because the science was already fading after the war, they often contain misinterpretations or they introduce completely new, non-scientific stories.
Now, this is where the author makes a pretty controversial claim about the spread of civilization. He uses these Brahmanas to argue against the idea that Indo-Europeans came from outside India. How does that argument work?
It's like a piece of intellectual detective work. The Satapatha Brahmana has new myths in it, stories that you just don't find in the older Ṛgveda. Roy's point is this. A lot of later Greek legends, like the ones that form the basis for the Zeus myths, they line up really closely with the myths in the Satapatha Brahman, but not the older Ṛgveda.
So what does that imply?
Well, if all the Indo-European groups had come from some shared external homeland, their oldest, most foundational myths should all trace back to the oldest text, the Vedas. The fact that the Greek myths match the later Indian texts suggests that the migration of peoples happened after the Satapatha Brahmana was written.
Which would place the cradle of that civilization squarely in India.
Exactly. It completely reverses the common narrative.
After that, we move pretty quickly through the later literature, the philosophical Upanishads and the really brief sutra texts.
Right. The Upanishads are more about the philosophical conclusions.
No.
Then came the sutra literature, which was so incredibly concise that a single phrase could hold a huge amount of information. It even required its own interpretation system, the 6 Vedogas, which included things like Jyotiya or astronomy.
And then finally, we get to the really big popular body of knowledge, the Puruṣas.
The Puruṣas are the latest layer. The author calls them the big tree that grew from the Vedic seed. And they are massive, voluminous works. They're what most modern Hindus actually rely on for their understanding of creation and history.
But by this point, the original scientific code is what? Gone.
It's essentially lost. It's buried under just layers and layers of narrative and ritual.
Which brings us to this paradox of interpretation, what Roy calls the lost code. When the science was forgotten, the commentators got desperate.
They did. They were faced with verses that made absolutely no literal sense, like a sage asking for 100 cows. So they felt they had to impose hundreds of different meanings onto a single word just to make the poetry seem spiritually relevant.
And the example he gives for this is shocking.
It's the word gau, which literally means cow. Over time, it accumulated 47 different meanings, from milk and sun rays all the way to the earth itself.
But wait, if the Ṛgveda is a precise scientific text, like Roy claims, why would original composers use a word for an animal, a cow, if they really meant something abstract, like a ray of light or a fundamental particle? That seems designed to be confusing.
And that is the brilliant. Roy says there are only two interpretations, the literal, or apparent one, and the scientific, the actual one. And you have to keep the original literal words because they are the encryption key.
Give us that key example again.
Okay, take the verse. Indra created cows from serpent for Trita. Now, a later commentator might translate gau, cow, as water, and ahi, serpent, as cloud.
So it becomes Indra created waters from cloud.
Right, which makes a kind of mythological sense, but it completely destroys the cosmic secret. Roy insists that to get to the physics, the words have to keep their literal meaning, cow and serpent, because those objects are placeholders for specific cosmic things, like particles and antiparticles. The literal meaning preserves the signifier.
That reframes the whole point of the oral tradition then. It wasn't just about preserving the sounds, it was about preserving the exact specific vocabulary, even if that vocabulary seemed bizarre later on.
Exactly. The integrity of the vocabulary is the integrity of the code.
Okay, before we jump into the cosmology itself, we have to touch on the dating controversy. Roy's whole thesis rests on the Vedic civilization being the IVC, around 3000 BC, which is much, much earlier than a lot of standard academic timelines.
He's extremely critical of previous attempts to date the Vedas. He dismisses Max Muller's timeline of 1200 BC as illogical, saying it was just based on working backward from a biblical timeline without any hard evidence. Muller himself even admitted later it was totally speculative.
And what about the astronomical dating methods? Those often place the Vedas way earlier, around 4500 BC. He rejects those too.
He does, because scholars who tried that had to impose these really questionable mystical meanings onto the text to make the star charts fit. Roy's objection is fundamental. If you're interpreting the text incorrectly from the very start, trying to date it with astronomy is useless.
So how does he land on his 3000 BC date?
He turns to archaeology. He argues that if you match the lifestyle, the religious beliefs, the symbols described in the hymns with the actual artifacts and seals from the Indus Valley Civilization, you find a striking match.
So for him, it's definitive. The IVC was the Vedic civilization.
Yes, and that this Veda was composed right at its beginning, linking this profound science directly to that advanced ancient society.
All right, that sets the foundation. Now let's take that huge leap into Chapter 2, the time before time. This is where the Vedic cosmology really starts to diverge from what you might expect.
It really does. It takes us back to a state where, as the author puts it, even time did not exist. We start with the supreme being in its pre-creation state.
The golden womb.
Right. Ṛgveda from the Ṛgveda. This is the unmanifested form.
And the symbolism of gold is important here, isn't it?
It's crucial. In Vedic literature, gold is the color and symbol of energy. You know, think of things getting yellow or white hot at extreme temperatures. So associating the supreme state with gold means it's a state of pure energy. The golden womb isn't a physical thing, it's the infinite energy source from which everything comes.
Okay, and now we get to the thesis that really challenges our modern understanding.
Yeah.
The difference between this Vedic starting point and the Big Bang singularity.
Yes. The standard Big Bang model, as you know, says the universe began from a singularity, an infinitely hot, infinitely dense point containing everything. The Vedic model is the exact conceptual opposite.
Which is what?
That the universe was completely empty in the beginning. There's a quote from the Taittiriya Brahman that says, earlier there was absolutely nothing. There was no heaven, no earth, and no atmosphere.
No matter, no energy, no space.
And no time. And the temperature is also inverted. If the Big Bang started infinitely hot, the Vedic universe began extremely cold.
So instead of starting hot and cooling down, it starts cold and warms up.
Precisely. Evolution is initiated by a rise in temperature, a process called tapa, to heat or to warm up. This tapa is the catalyst that creates matter, energy, and space itself from the void.
But wait, if the universe was a complete cold void, where did that initial heat, that tapa, come from? That seems like a contradiction.
That's where you have to connect back to the Ṛgveda, the golden room. That's the unmanifested, boundless energy source that exists outside the void. The creation, the tapa, is this self-willed warming that initiates a change within the void, turning potential into actual.
So it's an energetic event, not an explosion from a pre-existing dense point.
Exactly, it's a cold start. And the transition from that void to the first elements is described using two very specific terms that are often mistranslated as water.
Okay, this is the distinction between Salila and Āpaḥ.
Yes. The state of complete darkness and perfect equilibrium, the undifferentiated void, is called salila. While it literally translates as water, the key is the adjective used with it, aprakeka, which means undifferentiated. That confirms its technical meaning as a homogeneous primordial fluid.
And when that equilibrium breaks?
That's Āpaḥ. The moment inhomogeneity appears and the fundamental forces start to differentiate, that's Āpaḥ. It also literally means water, but its technical meaning is the beginning of complexity. The author stresses that this distinction is as precise and important as the difference between speed and velocity in modern physics.
So the move from Salila to Āpaḥ is like going from a scalar field to a vector field, where directional forces suddenly emerge.
That's a perfect analogy, and if you miss that distinction, you just end up with two types of water, and the science is completely lost.
Here he argues that this linguistic failure, confusing the technical terms with literal water, is what led to all the flood myths around the world.
It's argued to be the source of almost all of them. Once that technical meaning was lost, people just assumed the beginning consisted of literal water. You see it in the Bible, Genesis, the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. You see it in the Popol Vuh myths in South America.
And this also explains the belief in a massive universal flood that never actually happened in recorded history.
That's the theory. The cultural memory of a cosmic flood, the initial chaotic, fluid state of the Po, got misinterpreted over time as the terrestrial geographical flood.
Okay, let's move into chapter 3. This is where we start looking at the actual geometry of this new cosmos through the lens of the famous Puruṣa hymn. And it immediately gives a huge clue about the structure of space.
It does. The very first verse says that Puruṣa, the supreme being, is covering the universe and is beyond also in 10-finger form.
10 fingers. It's almost impossible to hear that today and not immediately think of something like string theory, which needs extra spatial dimensions.
And the author says this is not a coincidence. He says it's a direct reference to 10 dimensions. In Vedic terms, directions, disho, were often personified as the hands or fingers of nature. And other texts, like the Sarasvatī Brahman, explicitly mention 10 directions.
So he's equating direction with dimension.
Yes, the 10 fingers represents 10 dimensions existing outside the boundary of our universe.
That is a staggering claim. And this concept, he says, was preserved, even if it was in a confused way, in popular tradition.
Right. The common Hindu idea of 10 directions, north, east, south, west, the four corners, plus up and down, he sees that as a later garbled attempt to preserve the scientific knowledge of 10D physics. Counting the corners makes no sense geometrically, but it keeps the sacred number 10, which was the original code.
The hymn then goes on to divide up reality into these quarters, which, if you take them literally, make no physical sense.
It says, all that is born is his 1/4, his 3/4 is immortal in heaven. Now, obviously, the tiny Earth can't contain 1/4 of the entire universe, but the coded meaning is profound.
So what does that division actually represent?
It separates what is subject to the cycles of birth and death. The measurable 1/4, which is identified with matter and energy, from the vast majority of existence, the 3/4, which is immortal. This could be anything from dark energy to the space beyond our observable universe.
And as this process of expansion begins, the universe gets a specific scientific name.
Yes, it's called Viraya, which means extremely big. And, crucially, the boundary of this expanding universe is named Pura, which means a fortified town.
A fortified town. That's a powerful image. It suggests something that has to be actively broken through.
And that's where the god Indra comes in. His title is Purandara, one who breaks the fortified towns. This isn't a warrior god smashing a city. It's the personification of the expansive force that continually breaks the boundary of the universe, the Pura, allowing it to keep growing. Indra is the force of expansion.
So how is this creation of matter and energy and space from nothing described? It's called a sacrifice, a yajna.
The cosmic sacrifice of Puruṣa is yajna. But here, yajna has to be understood scientifically as simply a change of form or state. It's the process of turning the unmanifested potential energy of the golden womb into the manifested universe.
And it's described using seasonal and numerical analogies.
To make it understandable, yes. Spring was the butter, summer the fuel, winter the oblation. It's a metaphor for the timing and components of creation, and it's linked to specific numbers. The 3 lokas, Earth, atmosphere, heaven, and 7 enclosures, which makes 21 total components. These aren't random numbers, they're the required parameters for the transformation.
This all seems so robust in the Ṛgveda, but Chapter 3 shows how quickly the science started to decay in the later texts.
The deviation is really clear when later texts start equating Puruṣa with another figure, Prajapati. The Satapatha Brahman actually says that Puruṣa was born after the golden egg was created.
Which is a fundamental error in the timeline.
It's a total contradiction. If Puruṣa is the golden womb, he can't be born from it. It shows the original scientific sequence was already lost.
And Roy argues this is what influenced Greek mythology.
Yes. The later myths about Prajapati, like him transforming into animals to cohabit with his daughter, he argues that those stories spread westward and formed the basis for many of the Zeus myths. The scientific confusion led directly to mythological proliferation.
Which brings us to Chapter 4 and the expansion itself. And again, the key is hidden in the language in the Sanskrit word for universe.
Brahmancha. It's a perfect example of linguistic code. Brahma means to expand, and Ancha means egg. So the universe is scientifically defined as an expanding egg. This core concept became almost universal, influencing creation myths everywhere.
The cosmic egg is everywhere, even in the later Matsya.
Right, which describes the self-existent being, Swayambhu, entering the golden egg and being called Vios. It continues the metaphor, but it places the expanding force inside the structure, pushing out.
But the expansion wasn't smooth or continuous at first. The early universe was called the dead egg.
Martant. It means dead egg, and it signifies a universe that was initially unable to sustain life. And this is key. The Vedic view of expansion was not the continuous singular push of the Big Bang. They saw it as a delicate, unstable balance between expansion and contraction forces.
And this instability is told through the story of Aditi's sons.
Right. Aditi had 8 sons, and Martanta was the undifferentiated 8th one. The story is a symbolic description of this chaotic period where the fundamental forces of nature had to adjust. It was only after this adjustment that the universe stabilized and became Vivasvana, the livable, steady universe.
But this idea of a livable universe led to a major chronological error later on, didn't it?
It did. Later commentators confused Vivasvana, the livable universe, with Vivasvana, meaning man. This led to the post-Vedic myth that man was created at the very beginning of time. Roy is really clear on this. The universe is billions of years old. Human civilization is maybe 10,000 years old. Confusing the two is a huge scientific error.
Okay, so we have the boundary, the Pura, and the force breaking it, Indra. Who is the engine driving the expansion itself?
That role belongs to Baspati. His name literally means expansion of the universe. He is the personification of outward growth. The Ṛgveda says his work is to make firm become pliant, hard become soft.
So he overcomes the resistance. And where is all the matter and energy hidden in this coded geography?
The mountain is the symbol for the surface or boundary of the universe. And the wealth, the Vasumanta, which is matter and energy, is hidden inside that mountain. When Baspati pushes the surface back, he frees the hidden wealth.
And the most fascinating coded particles are the cows.
The cows. A verse describes Baspati freeing cows from the mountains. This is the moment when the hidden potential manifests into its constituent parts. And these cows, Gao, Roy, identifies them as the fundamental particles of nature. The Gao particle.
To really drive home this idea of a cold start, this slow incubation, the source analyzes this incredible symbolic dialogue.
It's one of the most intellectually beautiful parts of the book. The dialogue between sage Agastya and his wife, Lopamadra. Their names are the code.
Okay, let's decode them.
Agastya comes from Aga, meaning not move. He represents the fixed center of the universe, the stable point of origin.
And Lopamadra.
Her name comes from Lopa, disappearance, and Mudra, wealth or matter. She symbolizes the vanished matter and energy, everything that was still unformed in that early cold phase.
So their conversation about their relationship is really a conversation about the state of the universe.
Exactly. It's a scientific explanation for the cold start and the long incubation period before vigorous expansion like having children could happen. The early universe was stable, Agastya, but it lacked the material wealth, Lopamadra, for immediate evolution. It's physics disguised as poetry.
And the result of this process, the actual creation of matter, is described with colors that were later tragically misinterpreted.
The final verses say their children were of two colors, black and white. Roy says these represent antimatter and matter. And this is a critical point for him because he uses it to directly disprove the racist interpretation of the Aryan invasion theory.
That's a very sensitive academic debate. How does this coded interpretation dismantle that reading?
The old Aryan invasion theory misinterpreted verses about destroying dark-skinned people as a historical conflict between fair-skinned invaders and dark-skinned natives. Roy argues that these descriptions are not about people at all. They're about the destruction, the annihilation of antimatter, black, when it meets matter, white.
So the conflict is cosmic, not racial.
It's physical, not historical. He claims the words were completely misappropriated once the scientific context was lost. It reclaims the text as a document of physics.
The fact that they're detailing matter and antimatter creation suggests a really deep understanding of cosmic symmetry.
It suggests they knew that for every particle, an antiparticle must be created, and that the early universe went through a period of annihilation before the stable, matter-dominant universe Vivasana could emerge. The whole process is this epic battle between expansion, Indra, and contraction, Vitra, at the edge of the cosmos.
Wow. This first deep dive into chapters 1 through 4 of Vedic physics has been, well, it's been a monumental shift in perspective. We've gone from seeing the Ṛgveda as a coded scientific text to this breathtaking claim that it describes a universe starting from a cold, empty void.
Yeah, the diametrical opposite of the Big Bang singularity. We've laid out the foundation of this Vedic cosmology. The linguistic evidence in words like Brahmacha, the technical difference between Salila and Āpaḥ, and the personification of physical laws.
Concepts like the 10-finger form, hinting at 10-dimensional physics, and that beautiful allegory of Agastya and Lopamadra explaining the cold start of the universe.
And, critically, we've seen how these scientific codes, especially the black and white children, as antimatter and matter, can be used to challenge and maybe even overturn some really controversial historical theories about ancient India. The argument is that the text is fundamentally about physics, not ethnicity.
And this is just the beginning of the decoding process, isn't it? We've only covered the universe's initial formation.
That's right. In our next deep dive, we will move into the subsequent chapters of Vedic physics. That's where Ro gets into the specific identities of the fundamental particles, the mechanics of parallel spaces, the structure of the atom, and he brings this ancient science into direct comparison with contemporary field theory.
So we'll leave you with a provocative thought to mull over, taken right from the source material. What if the knowledge in the Vedas was so profoundly advanced, describing concepts like multidimensional space and matter-antimatter dynamics that our own physicists are only now formally exploring? That the only way the ancient sages could guarantee it would survive for 5,000 years was to wrap it in the impenetrable shield of poetry and ritual, just patiently waiting for a time when modern science could finally catch up and provide the key.
Think about the sheer intellectual commitment that would require. That's a really powerful idea to sit with until our next deep dive. Continuing our conversation, welcome back to the deep dive. We are back on the clock, speeding through this really extraordinary piece of scholarship that reinterprets ancient Vedic texts.
Yes.
And it's reinterpreting them not as, colorful mythology, but as a meticulously coded textbook on cosmic physics.
Indeed. Last time, we laid the cosmological groundwork, the initial concepts of creation and, well, the basic universal framework.
Right.
Today, we are undertaking a very focused deep dive into chapters 5 through 8 of the source material.
Okay.
And these chapters, they move us past the origin story and really drill down into the operating mechanics of the universe.
The nuts and bolts.
Exactly. It's geometry, it's boundaries, these hidden parallel spaces that coexist with us, and the startling scientific identities of the ancient elements, fire, water, air.
Which the authors claim are actually fundamental forces in particles.
That's the core of it.
So our mission today is to unpack this claim that the universe is a scientifically structured, expanding system. The core assertion remains, it's truly radical.
It is.
That names we all know from temple murals or epic poems. Indra, Vitra, Viner, along with what seem like simple material descriptions like water, Āpaḥ, and earth, Pithivi. They're all stand-ins.
They're code.
They're physical phenomena, quantifiable cosmological forces, or specifically defined spatial dimensions. We're looking at a framework of existence that is just so highly structured.
And critically, it offers an alternative framework, one that often contrasts sharply with modern models like the Big Bang Theory.
Especially on things like boundaries and dark matter, right?
Especially on those.
Okay, so to properly situate ourselves, we have to start with the shape and, crucially, the extent of the universe in this Vedic view.
Yes, and this is where the contrast with modern cosmology begins immediately. Mainstream Big Bang cosmology. It typically models an unbounded or infinitely expanding universe.
No edge.
No edge.
Yeah.
In contrast, the Vedic cosmos, which is called Brahmasha, is explicitly defined as an expanding egg or a spheroid.
Brahma meaning to expand.
And Ansha meaning egg, so an expanding egg.
That concept of the Brahmta being a bounded, expanding egg immediately raises a physical question. If it's a container, what's outside the container?
And the Veda is, strikingly specific about this. It dictates that the Brahmanta possesses a distinct physical boundary.
Okay.
And the space outside the universe is 10-dimensional.
10-dimensional, not just empty space.
No. The source material points to the Puruṣa, which describes this cosmic entity, Puruṣa, existing beyond also in 10-finger form.
And these 10 fingers are interpreted as 10 dimensions.
Consistently. And this is far from some, arbitrary mysticism.
And this is where that synergy between ancient concepts and, modern theoretical physics becomes truly compelling.
Exactly. I mean, modern theoretical attempts to unify fundamental forces, supersymmetry or SUPSY, and superstring theory.
Right.
They often require space to possess extra compactified dimensions to mathematically accommodate all the known forces.
And the minimum requirement for something like superstring theory is what, 10 dimensions?
At least 10 dimensions. So the Vedic model, written millennia ago, posits a 10-dimensional exterior space right from the genesis of the universe. It suggests the cosmos resides in a higher dimensional medium.
This external dimensional structure is essential for defining the boundary itself.
It is.
So we don't have an infinitely expanding void. We have this bounded 10-dimensional egg that is actively expanding.
Right.
And boundaries inherently imply pressure and tension, and that brings us to the most famous cosmic conflict in the texts.
Indra and Vitra.
The legendary battle between Indra and Vitra. And this is interpreted here not as a mythological feud between two divine figures, but as a perpetual, quantifiable, cosmic tug-of-war happening right at that physical boundary layer.
That is the crucial reinterpretation. Indra is defined as the expansion force.
And Vitra.
Vitra is the contraction force. Their conflict defines the dynamic state of the universe, sort of oscillating perpetually at the edge or the surface of the Brahmaj.
So let's delve into their specific scientific identities, which are based entirely on their mythological actions and names.
Okay.
Vitra literally means one who covers or one who restrains. In physics, what force perfectly encapsulates that idea of restraining or covering a surface?
Well, Vitra is identified as the surface tension of the universe.
Surface tension? Like on water.
Exactly like on water, but on a cosmic scale. Surface tension is a contractile tendency of the surface of a liquid, or in this case, the cosmic soup, that allows it to resist external force.
And a key characteristic of surface tension is that it seeks to minimize the surface area.
Precisely. So since the Brahmak is an expanding spheroid, Vitra is the resisting force that wants to shrink the universe back down, keeping matter and energy confined. That is its covering nature.
That makes perfect sense for the villain of the piece, the one holding back the flow. Now, for the hero, Indra, Vitra's adversary. He's identified as the electric force, the primary driver of expansion. How does the Vedas support using the electric force specifically?
The evidence comes from Indra's epithets and his actions. His most famous epithet is Purandara,
which means
one who breaks fortified towns. Cosmologically, that means one who breaks the unified structure of the universe apart.
I see.
And the electric force is the ideal expansive motor because, unlike gravity, which is purely attractive and wants to collapse the universe, the electric force can be repulsive.
And it acts over long ranges.
It does. It provides the necessary energetic push to overcome the confining force of Vitra, the surface tension. The source suggests that the repulsive action of electromagnetism, particularly at high energies, is the dominant force causing the expansion of the cosmic spheroid.
Okay, for a modern scientist hearing this, the immediate skepticism would be that this sounds like post hoc rationalization, reading physics back into ancient poetry.
Of course.
How does the source material or the Veda itself provide any tangible physical evidence for this interpretation?
The evidence is remarkably physical. It focuses on phenomena that occur exclusively at a surface layer. The Satapatha Brahmana mentions the creation of foam, phena, when the primordial fluid, pul, which we'll get to later, is heated.
Foam. And foam, by definition, is a structure stabilized by surface tension.
Exactly. The text links this creation of phena directly to the operations at the boundary.
So the ancient text is describing a universe whose structure resembles foam bubbles and voids, a direct consequence of surface tension at the earliest stages of evolution.
Precisely. And if we leap forward to modern astronomical observation, what do we see at the largest observable scales?
The cosmic web.
The cosmic web. A vast structure composed of immense bubbles and voids, these vast regions virtually empty of matter, surrounded by dense sheets, filaments, and clusters of galaxies.
And the source argues this cosmic web is the macroscopic manifestation of that surface tension acting on the primordial fluid.
It is. If the universe behaved like a fluid with surface tension at high energies, it would naturally organize itself into a foam-like structure.
And the Big Bang model, which relies so heavily on gravitational dynamics, it struggles to predict or fully explain the scale and uniformity of these vast bubbles and voids.
Right. Not without invoking significant arbitrary parameters.
But the Vedic model, with its intrinsic surface tension component with Vutra, explains this geometry as a necessary consequence of this boundary dynamics. That's a powerful internal consistency.
It is. The description moves from force, Indra versus Vutra, to mechanism, surface tension creates foam, to outcome.
The current cosmic web.
Right.
And the outcome of that battle isn't just expansion, it's release. The slaying of Vutra, who is often depicted as a serpent holding back cosmic waters, or even the wild boar Varaha is described as freeing 7 rivers and cows that were hidden inside mountains or rocks.
Yes, the rock is known as Bala. We need to identify these freed elements.
Let's do it.
The 7 rivers represent the fundamental flow of matter and energy from the boundary into the nascent universe. They initiate the dynamic flow within the Brahmaj.
But the cows, or Gao, that's the key revelation about matter creation, isn't it?
It is. The source identifies Gao as representing the fundamental particles of nature.
So the particles were trapped. They were hidden.
They were hidden within the potential energy barrier created by the universe's surface tension, which is the mountain, or Bala.
Okay, so think of it like a massive energy barrier that has to be overcome to spontaneously create matter-antimatter pairs or release potential energy.
You've got it. And Indra, the electric force, provides the energetic input, the lightning flash, the cosmic thunderbolt that breaks this surface barrier.
Earning him the name Gatrapid.
The breaker of the shelter of cows, releasing these fundamental particles into existence.
This transforms a simple agrarian or pastoral myth into a description of particle creation and initial cosmic flow. The ancient text is essentially describing an energetic process where the electric force overcomes a cosmic surface tension barrier to release fundamental matter.
It's a mechanism for particle production at the universal boundary. And, the source makes a fascinating historical observation here.
What's that?
This narrative framework, the serpent holding back the cosmic waters, or the divine hero slaying a creature of darkness to release light and life, it didn't stay consigned to India.
Right. We see that everywhere. The dragon or serpent archetype representing chaos or confinement is universal.
It's universal. From the Greek myth of Apollo slaying Pytho, the serpent guarding the sacred spring, to the depiction of Satan as a serpent in the Bible, the core narrative structure is derived from the Vedic scientific observation of Vitra, the surface tension, holding back pol, the primordial fluid.
So over time, the scientific meaning was lost.
It was lost, and the story was misinterpreted as history or morality or just pure fantasy. The Veda, according to this analysis, provides the original physics behind the global serpent myth.
That brings us from the cosmic edge inward. The Vedic cosmology then presents this deep structural division within the egg itself, the concept of the Triloka,
The 3 parallel spaces.
Pathivi, Antarika, and Dhyao. And this is perhaps the most challenging concept for modern minds, accustomed to a single unified space.
It is, because these aren't layers, like an onion skin.
Right.
They're intermingled, coexisting spaces. The cosmic egg wasn't merely divided into an upper and lower half. It was split by a force called Vayu into intermingled webs.
And the term for this structural complexity is Mayojala.
The measured web, or the intertwined matrix.
And the key insight here is that these three spaces exist simultaneously at every single point in the universe.
At every point.
Meaning Prithivi is interwoven with Antarika, which is interwoven with Dio. Let's break down their properties, starting with the one we know best.
Okay, Prithivi is the observer space. The term Prithivi means broad or extended.
This is our world.
This is the realm of stars, galaxies, and the matter particles that are constantly created and annihilated particles that have a lifespan. It's the space where 4 dimensions, 3 spatial and 1 temporal, are immediately observable.
Then we move to Dayu, which is described as the bright, remotest sky or heaven.
Diao is the light space, the hidden domain. It is the abode of pure energy and the immortal gods.
Why immortal?
Because energy is eternal, it can't be destroyed, only transformed. This space is beyond the reach of standard physical observation, reflecting the fact that the majority of energy in the cosmos is hidden from our instruments.
And mediating between these two is Antarika, the intermediate space.
Antarika is the interface, the junction layer between Prithivi, the matter space, and Diao, the energy space.
Okay, an interface.
Think of it like a thin membrane, or, the meniscus, between 2 immiscible chemical phases. It's essential for interaction, but it is distinct from both phases it connects.
And the profound importance of this tripartite structure is captured by one of the principal deities of the Vedic era, Vidu.
Right, from the root vi, meaning to pervade.
And his famous 3 steps are not random acts of divine travel.
They are literal. Vinu's 3 steps cover the entire universe, corresponding precisely to Prithivi, Antarika, and Diao.
And the myth of Vidu appearing as a dwarf, Vamana,
and tricking the demon king Bali into giving him only 3 sets of land, yes, that illustrates this pervasiveness perfectly.
Although the dwarf's steps seem small.
The first step covered the earth, Prithivi. The second covered the middle region, Anantarik. And the third stepped into heaven, Diao, showing how these 3 spaces fully envelop and define existence at every single location.
That gives context to the structure, but what is the actual stuff of the intermediate space? What's the physical fabric of Antari?
The source identifies its core component as Vayu.
We know Vayu literally means air or wind, but scientifically it's defined much more profoundly.
It is. Vayu is the field. This is arguably one of the most powerful scientific declarations in the Veda.
Wow.
The source quotes a mantra from the Satapatha Brahma that states, "The sun and the rest of the universe are woven in a string." What is that string that is Vayu?
That is the perfect, concise scientific definition of a field, the unseen, non-material entity that binds and mediates forces across the cosmos.
It really is.
So the Veda proposes that space is not empty, which is a concept modern science has. Well, it's struggled to accept and then reject and then accept again.
Right. And Vayu, the field, is the omnipresent medium that makes up the intermediate space, acting as the mediator between observable matter and non-observable pure energy.
So it solves the problem of action at a distance.
Yes.
Yeah.
How does the sun affect the planets across a void? According to the Veda, it doesn't cross a void. It interacts through the field, through Vayu. This concept of a non-empty, field-based intermediate space is central to all Vedic mechanics.
The source also touches on how this layered reality resolves issues with quantum mechanics, specifically this idea of perforated space.
Yes.
If we as observers are limited to Prithivi, our observer space, the cosmos appears discontinuous. It seems to have holes.
These apparent holes are where matter particles vanish or seem to jump instantly, which we call quantum jumps.
Right.
The Vedic sages argued that these holes are simply gaps in Prithivi, the space we can access. If you account for all 3 interwoven spaces, Prithivi, Antarika, and Diao, the space becomes complete. There's no discontinuity.
And this is tied to the concept of koshas.
The subtle scales of observation, yes. We should probably explain those.
Please.
Certainly. Kosha means sheath or layer. The grossest layer, Annamaya Kosha, is the physical body and the space we observe directly. Modern science is largely confined to this grossest level of observation.
Okay.
But the Vedic texts claim access to much subtler levels, particularly the Manamaya Kosha, the mental or subtle field layer, and the Vijnanamaya Kosha, the wisdom or causal field layer.
So by perceiving reality through these subtler koshas,
the sages claimed they could perceive the complete Maya Jala, the interwoven matrix of all 3 spaces, and thus resolve the appearance of quantum jumps or cosmic perforations.
that's a fascinating synthesis. The holes in space are merely the parts of Prithivi that are actually occupied by the field, Antarika, or the light space Diao.
It connects observation directly to dimensionality.
Speaking of dimensions,
We established the outside of the universe is 10-dimensional, but now we have to examine the dimensional geometry inside the universe within these three spaces.
and what does that look like?
Inside the universe, the three spaces, Prithvi, Antarika, and Diao each possess 7 dimensions.
7 each.
7 each. This leads to a structured, 21-dimensional reality within the total Brahmachek. So although we primarily observe the 4 dimensions of Prithvi, the other dimensions are internal, complex, and crucial for governing physical forces.
Why 7? That number appears repeatedly throughout the Veda.
The source material connects these 7 dimensions to what the Vedas call the 7 prominent meters or directions.
Okay.
And critically, these directions are described as having properties of iron.
Iron.
And in the Vedic code, iron is frequently used as the term for magnetic properties. This suggests that these hidden dimensions are intrinsically tied to the electromagnetic structure of the cosmos. They possess magnetic properties or govern magnetic orientation and flux.
This structure is physically symbolized by the figure Trishira Vishvarpa.
The 3-headed, 7-rayed figure, yes,
The 3 heads.
represent the 3 spaces, Prithvi, Antarika, Diao, and the 7 rays emanating from each head represent the 7 dimensions within each space.
So this figure isn't just some mythological creature.
Not at all. It's a diagram illustrating the cosmos's structured, multidimensional nature. It's a cosmic geometry mapped out in extreme detail by the sages.
And this detailed dimensional structure leads us directly to the most critical cosmological mystery of our age, dark matter and dark energy.
It does.
And the Veda seems to offer an astonishingly specific numerical answer to the universe's composition based on the Puruṣa hymn.
It does. But before we get to the numbers, we have to establish that Puruṣa is understood here as the cosmic consciousness or primal being from which the entire mass energy of the universe springs.
Got it.
The hymn states, 1/4 of Puruṣa is in the earth, which is Prithvi or matter, and 3/4 is immortal in heaven, which is Diao or energy.
1/4 in our space, 3/4 in the energy space. That's a 25% to 75% split.
And interpreting this scientifically, the source claims that our observer space, Prithvi, only contains 25% of the universe's total mass energy. This is the matter we see, the matter that is born repeatedly, meaning it undergoes creation and annihilation.
And the remaining 75% of the universe's mass energy resides in the light space, DO, as pure, immortal energy.
That's the claim.
This numerical split is essentially the Vedic concept of dark matter and energy.
It is.
Modern physics observes the visible matter, which is around 5%, and calculates the total gravitational effects, concluding that about 95% of the total mass energy is missing.
Right. And we currently hypothesize dark matter and dark energy to account for that 95%.
And here is the profound difference.
Yes. The Veda claims that the missing 75% isn't dark in the sense of being composed of some unknown exotic particles. It is simply pure energy residing in a hidden, non-observable dimension. The light space, Diao.
This dramatically shifts the focus of research. We aren't looking for exotic dark matter particles.
We should be trying to understand the mechanisms of energy exchange with this vast, immortal energy reservoir that constitutes the majority of existence, exactly as described in the ancient texts.
That's truly mind-bending. It implies that modern cosmology's failure to account for the missing mass is not a failure of detection,
but a failure of dimensional assumption.
We're only looking in the 25% of space we can observe.
If the Vedic model holds, the problem isn't missing mass, the problem is missing space. Tao is not accessible to our 4-dimensional PV instruments, yet it dictates the large-scale gravitational and expansive dynamics of the entire system.
Wow. Okay, so we've established the structural geography of the cosmos, the bounded egg, the 3 interwoven spaces, the 75-25 energy split.
yeah.
Now, we apply this structural understanding to the classical 5 elements: fire, water, wind, earth, and sky. Chapter 8 essentially redefines these, arguing they are not elements but foundational forces and substances. Let's start with Agni, or fire.
Agni is fundamentally identified as energy, and because the universe is tripartite Prithvi, Antarika, the Agni manifests in 3 principal forms that correspond perfectly to the 3 spaces.
Demonstrating the ubiquitous nature of energy.
Exactly. First, you have Agni itself. In Prithvi, our observer space. This is the energy of transformation. It's where matter particles live and die, reflecting the constant conversion of matter into energy and vice versa.
Creation and annihilation.
Second, you have Vayu in Antarika, the intermediate space. This is the field energy we just discussed, the binding mediating force.
And the third.
Surya, in Dhyao, the light space. This is a pure, immortal light energy called the very secret place of Agni. This is the 75% reservoir.
This triple manifestation provides the crucial context for the next element, Āpaḥ.
Water.
We briefly mentioned Salila as the undifferentiated primordial fluid. When energy polarizes that fluid, we get Āpaḥ, which literally means water, but scientifically is far more dynamic.
Far more. Āpaḥ is the differentiated, polarized fluid state that emerges when equilibrium is broken. Scientifically, the source identifies Āpaḥ not as HO,
No.
but as the soup of matter-antimatter particles that permeates the universe, a polarization of energy into opposing charges.
So think of it as the highly energetic, charged plasma state of the early universe.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
And this is a massive distinction. It allows us to solve that ancient paradox that appears frequently in the Veda, fire residing in waters.
Yes, fire, Agni, residing in Āpaḥ. If you maintain the assumption that Āpaḥ means ordinary liquid water, the statement is nonsensical.
Fire can't live in water.
But if you substitute the scientific meanings from Chapter 8, the statement becomes profoundly coherent. Energy, Agni, residing in the matter-antimatter soup, Āpaḥ.
Which is a perfect precursor to the concept that energy is inherently embedded within those polarized particles, or that mass is a form of energy.
Precisely.
And this scientific redefinition of Āpaḥ as the charged primordial soup is also what the source claims is responsible for the confusion that led to global deluge myths.
Exactly. Later commentators and cultures, having lost the initial scientific code, simply translated the term Āpaḥ as water.
So the original cosmic statement that the universe began as a charged, highly energetic matter-antimatter soup was misinterpreted as a global flood narrative.
Yes. The idea that all life was created from cosmic waters is actually rooted in the concept of all matter being polarized from the energetic confluid.
So if Āpaḥ is the matter-antimatter soup, what happens when those particles meet?
Annihilation.
Which brings us to Rudra and his subsequent sons, the Maruta.
Annihilation produces intense, highly penetrating energy. Rudra is defined as this radiation, the intense high-energy output resulting from matter-antimatter destruction.
And the name Rudra means what makes one cry.
Referring to the painful, penetrating intensity of this radiation. Rudra is the precursor to Lord Siva, the god of annihilation and destruction, a perfect metaphorical role for cosmic radiation.
And since the Marutas are explicitly called the sons of Rudra, the sons of radiation, they must be the physical effect of that radiation.
They are defined as radiation pressure.
The force exerted by photons and other forms of radiation on surfaces.
Yes, and in cosmology, radiation pressure is critical because it's what forces the universe to expand. It is literally the expansive air in the cosmic balloon, the counterbalance to gravity and surface tension.
Now we get to the complex math. The Veda describes the Maruta as having 49 components, often seen as moving in 7 rows of 7.
7 by 7.
Why 49? This seems like a numerical complexity that should be entirely arbitrary in poetry, yet the source claims it correlates with higher dimensional physics.
This is a beautiful example of the Veda's coded precision. If, as we established in Chapter 7, the internal structure of the universe is governed by 7 dimensions, then the forces acting within that structure must be represented accordingly. Pressure, or stress, is mathematically represented by a tensor. In a 4-dimensional space, like our standard observed space, the stress tensor has 16 components, 4 by 4.
Makes sense.
However, in a 7-dimensional space, the stress or pressure tensor logically must have 49 components, 7 by 7.
Wait, you are suggesting that the Vedic description of Maruta having 49 components is a direct, accurate description of the components of the radiation pressure tensor acting within the 7-dimensional intermediate space Antarika.
That is the interpretation. The number 49 is not random. It precisely maps the mathematical requirement for describing stress and force distribution in a 7-dimensional geometry.
That is an astonishing level of detail to find in a text described as mythological.
It demonstrates a profound level of mathematical understanding embedded in the cosmology. It links Vayu, the field in the 7 dimensions, to the force of expansion, Maruta.
This correlation between ancient numerical description and dimensional tensor mathematics is perhaps the strongest evidence for the Veda operating as a scientific code.
I would agree. They recognized that the forces of the intermediate space were multidimensional. The Maruta, as radiation pressure, must distribute their force across the full spectrum of that 7-dimensional space, hence the 49 components.
Finally, we turn to Sarasvatī.
Also known today as the goddess of learning. Her original Vedic identity, Vak or speech, transforms into something enormous in this context.
Enormous is the right word. Sarasvatī represents the total mass energy of the universe.
And fitting with the structural model, this total mass energy is also tripartite.
Yes, possessing three forms: Ila, Sarasvatī, and Bharati. These forms correspond precisely to the mass energy portions residing in Prithivi, Antarika, and Diyau, respectively.
So Sarasvatī herself is the collective mass energy residing in the intermediate space, the most dynamic portion.
Correct.
But she is universally described as a river. Why a river? The great river Sarasvatī is famous in the texts because she represents the flow of matter and energy. Matter and energy are not static. They are continuously being created at the universe's surface, the boundary, often called the ocean or the mountain, and they start their journey inward toward the center.
So this dynamic transfer and motion of mass energy from the expansive boundary inward is the river Sarasvatī.
It is the river.
And since this flow involves charged particles, the Āpaḥ soup, the flow must carry inherent electromagnetic properties.
Absolutely. The Ṛgveda describes Sarasvatī as a fortress of iron.
And as noted earlier, iron is the code word for magnetic properties.
So this description highlights the inherent magnetic properties of the flow of charged mass energy throughout the cosmos. The river of mass energy is electromagnetically contained or guided.
And her seven sisters are then the seven-dimensional paths she flows through.
Precisely. The seven sisters of Sarasvatī are interpreted as the seven dimensions of the intermediate space, Antarika, through which this energy flow travels.
So chapters 5 through 8 establish this consistently coded, mathematically sound, and geometrically specific model of the cosmos, using core mythological figures to describe fundamental physics.
In just these 4 chapters, yes, we've moved from the philosophical origin to the precise physical description of the cosmos. We've charted the entire cosmic stage.
Starting with the bounded 10-dimensional exterior and that internal war between the electric force, Indra, and surface tension, Vitra.
We established the multi-layered geometry of existence, the Triloka, where 75% of mass energy resides in the hidden light space, Diyau.
And we redefined the classical elements as the foundational forces in substances. Energy, the charged matter-antimatter soup, radiation pressure defined by that 7D tensor.
And the total flowing, magnetically charged mass energy, Sarasvatī. The rigor with which this code maintains consistency. The number 7 applying to dimensions, the number 3 to spaces and forces, the precise definitions, it's remarkable.
It is.
And the most provocative conclusion remains that dark matter revelation from the Puruṣa hymn. If this ancient framework is correct, modern physics faces a serious constraint.
It's inherently missing the majority of existence, 75%.
Because that energy resides in Diyau, a hidden space that cannot be detected by instruments operating only within the constraints of Prithivi, our observer space. The problem is not necessarily a technological one,
but a conceptual one, about the nature of space itself.
Yes.
Which raises the challenging final thought for you to consider. If 75% of the universe is contained in a dimension that is non-observable to matter-based instruments, what mechanisms of observation, perhaps those subtler observation methods the Vedic sages claimed access to, would be necessary to unify our understanding of the cosmos? Must science redefine observation before it can redefine composition?
We have established the cosmic stage. Next time, we turn our attention to the inhabitants, the fundamental particles and forces, as we analyze the subsequent chapters. We'll dive into the Vedic concepts of quark confinement, matter and energy transformation, electrons, protons, and the origins of electricity and magnetism in the next sequence of concepts from this remarkable text.
Until then, keep digging, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.